The people who hurt me can feel magnetic, for reasons that have less to do with compatibility than recognition. I can learn to tell an old alarm from a living connection. I know the scene: a bistro, a stranger's attention landing on me, and my body behaving as if the room tilted. My heart lifts, my stomach tightens. Within minutes, I call it chemistry. A few weeks later, the same person answers vaguely, disappears, or turns warm only when I begin to retreat. I start reading the phone like weather. The attraction feels strongest where my footing feels least certain. That contradiction is the doorway to repetition compulsion, not a verdict about my character, and not proof that every intense attraction is misplaced. It is a clue that recognition can arrive before compatibility, carrying a climate into a new room. At the table, I remember 2 earlier relationships with uncomfortable precision. Different faces and histories, yet the same posture in me, reaching toward someone, moving away. I once treated that repetition as proof of poor judgment. Then a reliable person appeared. They answered plainly, made room for questions, and did not make affection feel like a prize. I noticed a strange quiet. Nothing was wrong, yet I felt no urgent need to know what happened next. My mind called it flatness. My body may have been meeting an unfamiliar pace. Safety is not identical to compatibility, and anxiety is not identical to desire. A calm date can still be a poor match. A thrilling date can still contain promise. The useful question is not how powerful the feeling is, but what it asks me to overlook. Outside the bistro, I walk toward the metro with the phone quiet. I used to think reflection had to arrive after another disappointment, when the pattern was impossible to deny. Now I try to catch it closer to the first spark, while choice is still available. That is why I keep returning to these psychological questions. They give a charged moment somewhere to go besides self-criticism. If this kind of careful inquiry helps you notice patterns with more generosity, subscribe and stay with the series. I want this channel to feel less like a set of answers and more like a shared walk through the places where ordinary behavior becomes mysterious. The point is not to distrust attraction. It is to give attraction context, so a familiar feeling does not make the decision for me. On the train, I open a psychoanalytic essay and find a less tidy idea than the internet version. It describes people repeating a conflict in action instead of remembering it. That observation became a root of repetition compulsion. It does not prove that every painful romance reenacts childhood or that an unconscious force outranks reflection. It offers a lens. An old relational problem may return, wearing a new face because the pattern is familiar, available, and emotionally charged. I hold that lens lightly. The same behavior can emerge from many causes: chance, limited dating options, a partner's circumstances, or my own expectations. Still, when the outcome keeps rhyming, the question changes. I am no longer asking only why this person disappoints me. I am asking what role I keep stepping into when disappointment begins. A child depends on adults who may be loving in one moment and absent in the next. With little power to change that climate, attention turns inward. What did I miss? What would make closeness last? Over time, watching for a delayed response can feel more useful than trusting a steady one. I am not describing a fixed program or assigning blame from one memory. I am describing how expectations can be learned through repetition. Some models call this a homeostatic pull. Familiarity can feel easier to regulate before it feels satisfying. It can lower uncertainty because I know how to navigate it. It can also keep me inside a narrow definition of connection. In adulthood, a distant reply may feel strangely legible, while an open one asks me to participate without old instructions. I begin learning its contours. The train's rhythm follows me into the study. I remember a promise made in childhood. If I became more useful, careful, impressive, or easy to love, distance might become warmth. That promise was not foolish. It offered influence in a situation I could not control. The trouble comes later, when the bargain enters dating. I feel drawn to someone whose approval seems within reach, because winning it might revise an old story. The partner becomes more than a person. They become a test. Hesitation feels like an invitation to perform, explain, wait, and try again. I call this a repair fantasy, a therapeutic idea about revising an emotional equation. It is a metaphor, not a fixed explanation. The cost appears when another person's limits become the stage on which I measure my worth. By morning, I am crossing a footbridge above traffic, testing that idea against its limits. The Imago model proposes that people can be drawn toward familiar wounds because an adult relationship offers a symbolic chance to revisit what was missed. That does not mean I seek a replica of a parent, or that childhood explains every choice. It means qualities can feel legible before they feel kind. A hard-to-reach person may activate the skill of earning attention. A steady person may offer no role I recognize. This is where the fantasy hides cleverness. It promises resolution through the very conditions that keep resolution out of reach. If the distant partner finally chooses me, the story seems corrected. Yet the effort required to obtain that choice can become the proof that the relationship matters. I am not pursuing closeness anymore. I am pursuing a verdict. That is why a generous person can feel strangely hard to receive. Their care does not demand a performance, so I cannot use effort to secure it. I may invent objections. The conversation is too easy. The attraction is not dramatic. Something must be missing. Sometimes something is missing. The point is to separate absent attraction from absent anxiety. Those sensations differ, but my first interpretation may collapse them. I watch what happens after a clear invitation, an honest answer, or a small disagreement. Does interest survive ordinary reality? Or does it depend on distance, ambiguity, and the hope of being selected? A relationship cannot repair an old dependency by repeating it. It can reveal the moment when I stop relating to a present person and start negotiating with an old silence. At a coffee counter, I notice how often my hand reaches for the phone before deciding what I am waiting for. The waiting has become an activity. Behavioral research calls it intermittent reinforcement. When a reward arrives unpredictably, checking can persist longer than when the reward is reliably available. The research comes from controlled learning settings, not dating, so I do not treat a texting gap as a laboratory experiment. The comparison is revealing. A clear reply ends uncertainty. An erratic reply makes every new message feel consequential because it might be the one that restores closeness. The loop is not proof of extraordinary love. It is a reason behavior can become sticky around inconsistency. My attention narrows, my day bends around a screen, and the person's actual qualities receive less scrutiny. The uncertainty has become louder than the evidence. I test the contrast with two messages. One comes from someone who says they are busy, names another time, and follows through. My body has little to solve, so the exchange may feel ordinary. The other arrives after silence, affectionate enough to erase doubt without explaining it. Relief floods the space where judgment had been. I do not need a chemical story to understand the consequence. Ending uncertainty can feel unusually rewarding. That relief may train me to check again, like a slot machine inviting a pull without promising a result. The analogy has limits. People are not machines, and inconsistency does not automatically create a conditioned bond. Context, history, personality, and care matter. Still, when I feel most attached after neglect, the timing deserves attention. I may be longing for the person, or for pressure to stop. On the streetcar, the message arrives. I feel the lift before reading it, then notice relief turning into evidence. See, this matters. A clinical paper on repeating trauma described reenactment as a way painful patterns can return, sometimes with the body involved before the story is clear. That belongs to a clinical tradition, not a universal law of romance. I use it carefully. The simpler observation is this. A cycle of alarm and rescue can make rescue feel like intimacy. Calm after fear has its own brightness. It can persuade me that the person who caused uncertainty is also the only person who can settle it. The hidden trade is that distress becomes the gatekeeper of relief. Once I notice that arrangement, the message on my screen loses authority. It remains information, but it is no longer the whole meaning of the relationship. At the final stop, I watch a couple share an umbrella and feel an unexpected comparison. Their ease does not prove happiness. Appearances carry limited evidence. Still, I imagine the difference between waiting for a reply and planning a day. After long uncertainty, Steadiness may register as low voltage. Attachment theory calls the threatened state attachment activation. Attention, protest, and pursuit can intensify when closeness feels at risk. The intensity is real. It does not tell me whether the bond is mutual or workable. That distinction had been missing. I was using an alarm strength to estimate a person's value. A stable connection may feel quieter because it leaves attention available for conversation, play, and the unglamorous logistics that let a life happen in the first place, without constant interpretation. Inside a greenhouse later that afternoon, I try to locate the alarm rather than argue with it. I'm scanning a face for withdrawal, rehearsing a message, speeding up my availability, or treating a small delay as a referendum on my worth. These sensations do not prove danger. They show that uncertainty has become salient. Attachment theory helps separate activation from intimacy. Activation asks, will this bond remain? Intimacy asks, can we meet honestly? They overlap, but they are not interchangeable. I can feel drawn to someone and notice that contact depends on pursuit. I can feel calm with someone and discover that our values do not meet. The answer is not distrusting the body. It is letting bodily urgency join, rather than replace, slower evidence of character over time. On the bench beside the reflecting pool, I see the trade-off clearly. Intensity offers clues about my history, but incomplete information about another person. If I pursue the rush, I may gain excitement, but lose ability to observe. If I dismiss quiet connections, I may preserve familiar chemistry and miss another kind of discovery. Neither choice is settled by a single flutter in the chest. I begin treating attraction as an invitation to gather evidence. Are words and actions aligned? Can interest survive a boundary? Does closeness expand when I stop performing? These questions do not turn dating into an audit. They return proportion to a feeling that once occupied the whole room. The old pull remains vivid, but it no longer gets to call itself destiny. It has to share the microphone with time, reciprocity, and my expanding attention. At the library, before answering the next message, I write what happened, what I felt, and what I inferred. The separation is modest, but it interrupts the old script. That separation gives me a little room before the story takes over. The reply came next morning. My chest tightened and attention narrowed. I inferred rejection, then an urge to work harder. The first two are observations. The third is a story, possibly familiar and possibly wrong. I add another check. After contact, do I feel more like myself or more like an applicant waiting for approval? This does not produce a perfect reading. It gives the feeling edges. I can respect the spark without obeying it, and let curiosity develop where urgency is absent. For me, the pause is not a wall against desire. It is a way of keeping desire connected to choice. I notice how quickly I demand a verdict from a first meeting. A quiet beginning gets compared with a peak feeling, an unfair contest. When someone is kind, clear, and consistent, I can allow a few unhurried conversations if my response is neutral rather than resistant. That is not a promise to manufacture attraction. It is a chance to see whether warmth grows without performed scarcity. I watch my curiosity. Do I want to know this person or to be chosen by them? Time offers ordinary evidence, plans made and kept, disagreement repaired, silence explained without theater. I do not need a dramatic test. Repeated small evidence can reveal more than a dramatic entrance. If interest remains absent, I can leave kindly. If it grows, I learn that calm was not emptiness. It was room. At dusk, the library gives way to the waterfront, where the harbor breaks and settles. I think about the repair fantasy with compassion. A child's self-blame can preserve hope. If I cause the distance, I can reverse it. Letting the theory go may bring sadness, because effort could not control another person's capacity. I can name what was absent, notice where I bargain for it, and let an adult relationship remain adult. The old question, what can I do to make them choose me, gives way to another. Are they choosing to meet me now? The shift is quiet, but it changes my attention. The loss is real, but it does not require a reenactment. I can feel the grief without making it a command to return. I stop auditioning for a role written before I arrived. Along the marina, the practical version becomes less poetic. If someone cancels without repair, keeps affection vague, or says they cannot offer commitment, I can treat that information as a limit, not a riddle. Their charisma may remain, so may my desire. The point is not punishing a person for their capacity. It is refusing to turn that capacity into a challenge for me. I ask whether the relationship available in reality matches the one I keep imagining. If not, stepping back protects time and attention. This does not mean every uncertain moment ends a relationship. People can be busy or imperfect and still communicate, repair, and participate. The boundary concerns pattern and response. A missed message is data. Repeated evasion without repair is a decision I can believe without debating my worth. By night, on a studio terrace, I can feel what I mean by erotic safety. I use the phrase for attraction with room to breathe, because neither person is managing an emergency. It is not permanence or immediate fireworks. It is a possibility. I can be candid, remain distinct, and watch care move both ways. Desire can become more textured. A glance is exciting without carrying the threat of disappearance. A disagreement can reveal character instead of endangering the bond. Even calm has movement when two people keep discovering each other. I once feared predictability would flatten romance. Now I wonder whether unpredictability had been doing too much emotional work. When anxiety leaves the room, curiosity has to learn to speak at normal volume. I can listen for what remains when suspense is gone. Looking over the skyline, I return to the opening spark. I do not want a rule saying calm is always wise and intensity always suspect. That would replace one automatic script with another. The sharper reframe is this: the spark is data, not a verdict. I can ask whether attraction survives clarity. If interest depends on delayed replies, imagined potential, or relief after being chosen, intensity may describe an activated pattern. If interest remains when words are clear, boundaries respected, and care reciprocal, it can become intimacy rather than pursuit. This cannot guarantee permanence. It gives me a better basis for choosing. I can enjoy the charge, slow the story, and watch what happens as reality becomes visible. The change is not that I stop feeling the old pull. It is that the pull no longer makes evidence disappear. After that realization, the city looks less like a field of traps and more like a place to gather evidence. I notice a date's follow-through, then my state afterward: expanded, tense, curious, diminished, or relieved. Both kinds of information matter. A consistent person can still be wrong for me. I can feel desire and decide its pattern costs too much. The point is not producing a perfect partner through vigilance. It is keeping attention wide enough to see the exchange. When care arrives without a chase, I practice receiving it without demanding fireworks. When ambiguity arrives, I resist filling its silence with a flattering story. These changes are small, almost boring in their repetition, yet they move intimacy from a performance I win toward a relationship I can inhabit. Later, when an old magnetism crosses my path, I use the reframe in motion. I notice the surge without naming it destiny. I look for the concrete cue: delayed contact, mixed signals, charm paired with little availability, or simply my sudden urge to prove myself. I widen the frame. How does this person behave when clarity is requested? Do they make room for reciprocity, or does my pursuit supply the entire connection? If the answer stays painful, I can step back before the fantasy gathers more evidence from my imagination. I do not need certainty about their motives. I need enough clarity about the exchange to choose participation. This procedure leaves room for surprise. Someone can recover from a poor beginning through honest repair. Someone appealing can reveal a pattern I cannot live inside. The decision belongs to the pattern, not the peak. With practice, desire does not disappear. It becomes less desperate for proof. I notice warmth that once seemed too quiet to count. Someone remembers a detail, states a preference, and stays present when conversation turns awkward. No moment produces a cinematic jolt. Together, they create a texture my earlier relationships lacked. I do not abandon myself to remain connected. I also respect the limits of this idea. Calm is not a moral credential. A clear communicator may still be incompatible, and a familiar spark may grow into something good. The difference is that I can evaluate it without romanticizing confusion. Attraction becomes less an attempt to solve a deficit and more an encounter between people with choices. I ask whether closeness supports dignity on both sides, not whether I can win a place inside someone's uncertainty. At dawn, near the park fountain, I can hold the trade-off without pretending it has an answer. Familiar intensity once offered one kind of safety. It told me how to pursue, monitor, and wait. It spent time, attention, and self-trust. Emotional safety can ask more at first because it removes instructions. I have to speak plainly, tolerate being known, and accept that a person's choice cannot be managed. In return, intimacy has room for mutuality rather than rescue. Old pathways may still light up. A glance, silence, or familiar distance can wake them, but conditioning is history, not destiny. I can pause, gather context, and choose a response, protecting desire and dignity. Freedom is not walking away from every risk. It is recognizing which risk belongs to intimacy and which repeats a price I already understand. Walking out of the park, I leave myself with a question rather than a verdict. In my current life, where am I still paying for familiar intensity, with time, attention, or self-trust? Where might a quieter connection be asking for patience, without asking me to abandon discernment? The trade-off will look different for each person, and a pattern is not a personality. I can be curious about the pull, honest about the cost, and kind toward the part of me that learned to navigate uncertainty. If this reflection gave language to something you have felt, share which trade-off is most alive in your current life stage. Take the question with you, and let the answer arrive slowly. Thank you for walking through the city with me. Stay simply human.